Well, hello there, everybody. If you're watching this on Wednesday, I suppose I should start with a happy Valentine's Day. And if for many of you, that might mean going out to dinner or some giving or receiving of gifts or flowers or chocolates or whatever goes along with that. I do just want to encourage you to appreciate one another and thank God for the gift of the love in your life on Valentine's Day. So we have been working through 1 Peter, as you know, on Sundays now for the past month or more. And we've been working through some things. We're now going to turn into the third chapter this week. But in the first couple chapters, Peter has taken us through this concept, this idea of laying out salvation and how it works. And he's come to the conclusion now you've trusted in Christ and you've received his salvation. Now what? What does that mean if you're part of the church, if you're a follower of Jesus, if you've trusted in him for salvation, that you are going to be different than the world around us, that we're going to act differently. And in so doing, that points other people to God, to glorify God. And it's tricky, right? It's not a performance thing. We're not trying to look better than anybody else. We're not trying to look perfect. We're just trying to follow what guys like Peter, who were around Jesus, tell us through the words of the scriptures. And so today, I just want to talk a little bit about where we've been and where we're going in these processes of living out faith. So 2 weeks ago, if you were here or remember, we talked about what it means as we interact with our unbelieving neighbors, the people around us who are not followers of Jesus, and so what does it look like to live around them? How do we treat them? How do we think of them? And then within that, we also talked about submitting to the governing authorities, and I've had a few really good conversations about what that looks like in our day. We live in a polarized country in a lot of ways, as well as good as so many things are. We recognize politically, at least, there's a lot of polarization. This is an election year. How do we live out submitting to the governing authorities in our day in light of or in view of how Peter is telling the Christians in that day to submit to even a brutal and harsh emperor and an empire within that? And so then we talked last week, Rick took us through this idea of what it looks like in the workplace. Almost all of us are working or are retired and know what it was like to be working, or are retired and went back to work, maybe even. But we get that's a hard ask sometimes. Some of you loved your jobs, you had great bosses, but almost all of us along the way have had some boss that would be hard to appreciate, hard to submit to, that they may be harsh. They maybe were demanding, maybe they were unfair. And so to hear Peter tell slaves, mind you, which is a little different context than what we're used to with slavery, but for him to tell them, also for him to tell us how to live this out in the modern world, we talked about that. How do we do it? Because sometimes it just doesn't seem fair, because they don't deserve it. We don't deserve to be treated harshly. We could easily come to that conclusion. They don't deserve our respect or submitting to them just because they're the boss. And then one thing that we talked a little bit about, Rick did last week, but I want to take you to within this is the reality is, as believers, we're going to suffer. Sometimes we're going to suffer because of bad people around us. Sometimes we're going to suffer because of the things that we have to go through. Sometimes we're going to suffer just because we have to do good, even in the midst of hardship. I want to take you to verse 21 of chapter 2. I'm reading out of the New Living Translation. It says, "For God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you. He is your example, and you must follow in his steps." And then Peter goes on to share, basically in poetic form, some of the things about Jesus as this suffering servant, as he was our substitute. Peter will lay out the substitutionary atonement. What we deserved, Christ took on. A perfect, spotless, sinless Christ willing to suffer something he certainly did not deserve. We deserved it, but he took our place. And Peter wants us to always have that in mind. The believer, always when we feel sorry for ourselves or feel as though something is unjust against us, we do need to remember Christ's example. As he describes, he is your example, and you must follow in his steps. And so when we come to grips with this with our unbelieving neighbors, when we come to grips with this, with submitting to the governing authorities, as we think about submitting to potentially even a harsh boss, we come from Jesus' example and we follow in his steps, who was willing to go through suffering for greater good. And we need to be as well. We're going to continue this, what it means to live out your Christian faith, what it means to receive the salvation and trust the Lord. How does it work out? We're going to look next week or this week at how it plays out in marriage, and then the following week is how it plays out among our fellow Christians in the church. So come with us on that journey the next couple of weeks. Again, have a great Valentine's Day. Hope you can look at each other and just marvel that God put you together. Until then, we'll see you later.